The New York Mets are going to win the 2025 World Series. The Mets' last championship was in 1986, and the Mets are going to win the title 39 years later. It is New York that last appeared in the World Series in the 111th World Series back in 2015. And the Mets are going to win the title 39 years after 1986 in 2025. It's New York that's come out to 39. Now, last year's winner, it's also Soto that's 39. So Soto's 39, New York is 39, but Soto is going to help the Mets win for the first time in 39 years. Juan Soto is come out to the 2025 World Series. The owner of the Mets, Steve Cohen. It is Steve that's come out to the 17th season for the Mets at Citi Field this year. Where's 2025 Mets? Their 64th season, their 17th season at Citi Field. Steve is come out to 64. 17th season at Citi Field. It's Steve that's come out to 17. The Mets made it to the World Series against the Royals in 2015. The Mets' last appearance was in the year 15, and Soto's come out to 15. The Mets are going to make the World Series 10 years later with Juan Soto. It's Juan that's come out to 10, so he hit that decisive home run in the 10th inning of the ALCS. Now, the Mets make it to the World Series 10 years later. 39 years later, the Mets win. The Mets make it back to the World Series 10 years later. So, one team that I really like in the American League is, well, I do like the Mariners I really like, and the Guardians I really like. Now, the Mariners are playing in their 27th season overall at T-Mobile Park. And so, again, Cohen in the Mets is Camacho 27. 27 outs for each team in baseball. Couldn't that 27th season at T-Mobile Park kind of foreshadow a Mets World Series, a Seattle Mariners World Series appearance? It makes a lot of sense, actually. It does. Citi Field could win the World Series for the first time in history. Seattle's Camacho of 82 and 19. Now let's type in Mariners. Now, there isn't an under 19 player World Series because we're at under 20 player World Series. So that's what we must keep in mind. The M's is Camacho of 25. Let's say if the Mets so going to the Mets list of seasons, if the Mets have a first round bye, they can win their 70th game in the playoffs to win their next championship. Enter the World Series with 66, like Camacho title, like Camacho the Empire State, and then suddenly you see Empire 39 and New York is 39 and Soto's 39, so I do like the Mets to win the title 39 years later, and it makes sense they could enter the World Series with 66 playoff wins in team history. Empire and titles 33, New York 33. What if Cleveland enters the equation? You never know if they do. Cleveland Guardians are a pretty good team. What admitted state in the Union is Washington? Juan Soto's only championship occurred with the Washington Nationals, and what if he could beat the team from the state of Washington, the Mariners? As far as the Mariners goes, their 49th season in franchise history. Washington is the gematria of Juan Soto's championship. He was with the Washington Nationals. No, Mariners play the Mets in the MLB Little League Classic. I never knew that. When we look at the Mariners, just who's the manager? Cincinnati Reds, Seattle Mariners, so a continuation of this year. What if it's Pete Rose? What about this star on the Mariners, that shortstop Rodriguez? Luis Castillo is really good. He's a Cincinnati Reds pitcher, former Cincinnati Reds pitcher. Luis Castillo is gematria of Seattle. Could the Mets' 16th series win come against Luis Castillo? Who can ignore the Mets manager, Mendoza? Number 64, the Mets' 64th season, they win the title. A Yankees coach, but he acquires a former Yankees player before he wins the title. Carlos Mendoza, he's a key part of this equation. Carlos Mendoza is gematria of the Mets' 70th playoff win in the team history. Now, Carlos is 94 and 40. Carlos would be gematria of Guardians if it's the Guardians that make it to the World Series. Mendoza's 33 and 78. Cleveland 78, 30. So you have Guardians and Mariners are looking like very strong connections. As far as the gematria of Cleveland, Donald Trump is born at New York City. Now, he's a Yankees fan, but he's born at Queens, where the Mets play at. The Mets did make it to the World Series during the year that his campaign began in 2015. Now, Queens would be gematria of the 27th season at T-Mobile Field. Now, let's go to Cleveland because we have to look at Seattle, first World Series in team history, or we can look at the Guardians with the new name making it to the World Series. James Dolan is his cousin, and he owns the New York Knicks. Interesting connection with Paul Dolan. 66 would be gematria of Empire, the Empire State. Could the Mets beat the Cleveland Guardians because Donald Trump is 78 years of age of inauguration? Now, didn't Trump win the election 33 years after Trump Tower was built? I mean, Freemason. That's some Freemason shit right there. 1983, then 2016. So Donald Trump is part of the cabal. You have to realize that. The Guardians' last title came in 1948. This would be 77 years into the future. Now Mets is Camacho at 12. Steve Cohen has owned the Mets since September 14. So what's the amount of time from when he owned the Mets to the time that he wins the championship as owner, basically with Juan Soto? So add insult to injury. 5 years and a month would be Camacho of Mets, would be Camacho of Indian by itself. Now, Indians is Camacho 70. Indians is Camacho 70. That's their real name, is the Indians. In the Mets, if they are not in the wild card round, their 70th win can occur against the Indians. So this Cleveland Indians Mets World Series looks like a possibility. There are 2 ways, 3 ways to go about this. List of the Guardians' overall playoff record, and then their record in the playoffs under the Guardians' name. 64-64 in the playoffs, like Camacho of Steve in the Mets' 64th season. So, Guardians look better than the Mets. The Guardians is Camacho Steve. So that's how we look at the date duration. 5 years and a month, 12 days. 12 days is closer to 5 years and a month. So he's going to win the World Series 12 years after he had the biggest fine in history for insider trading back in 2013. 12 years later, as owner of the Mets, he's going to win the title. So Mets is 51, 5 years and a month, he's going to win the title. Shane Bieber is the star pitcher of the Guardians. Bieber would be Camacho of Citi Field. City is 41. I really like Guardians. If they don't have to play the Yankees, I actually like Guardians. Logan Allen's a pretty hard thrower, isn't he? Logan Allen's Camacho of New York. Allen would be Camacho of the 17th season at Citi Field. They avoid the Yankees. Jose Ramirez, that star. Ramirez is Camacho of the Mets. They could enter the World Series with 7 wins if they happen to get a bye. Steve is Camacho 71. They have 8 wins So 15 if they do have a bye, 17 if it includes a wild card round. Steve, Camacho 17. Stephen Vogt is the manager today. Vogt is commentary of the Mets' 64th season. Cleveland, Ohio is commentary of 62. The Mets can win the World Series 62 months after Steve Cohen became the owner. He received the economics degree from the Wharton School, the same school that Donald Trump attended. You know, the dumbest student ever, according to his professor. But his degree in year 78, Cleveland 78. He became a minority owner in the year 2012, and 13 is a big Freemasonic number. 13 years later, he wins the World Series. The big star on the Mets is Lindor. Lindor played with the Guardians, and he's now with the Mets. So Lindor is going to beat his former team, the Guardians, in the World Series. He had 38 home runs, the most he's had in a career in a single season, 38 seasons without a title if you're the Mets. He had 33 home runs last year, 91 RBIs. This is pretty well researched. Lindor in reverses Mets. Francisco Lindor is Camacho champion. Lindor is going to beat his former team in the World Series. What about Clay Holmes? Leaving the Yankees and win World Series, and he's going to play the Guardians again. Holmes is Camacho of the Mets. So Clay Holmes is going to add insult to injury for the Yankees when he wins the World Series. They're 7-9 in spring training, and champion is Camacho 79. Interesting. Guardians, Mets. The Mets over the Guardians.